כל ימי חיי, לחזות בנועם בנועם אדוני, ולבקר בהיכלו. לחזות בנועם בנועם אדוני, ולבקר בהיכלו. אחת שאלתי מאת אדוני, אותה אבקש. אחת שאלתי מאת אדוני, אותה אבקש. שבתי בבית אדוני כל ימי חיי, לחזות בנועם בנועם אדוני, ולבקר בהיכלו. לחזות בנועם בנועם אדוני, ולבקר בהיכלו. So, good morning, everyone. Glad you're all here. This is Mondays in the Machzor. We are going to be sort of taking a look at some of the highlights and going through some pieces that I think sort of capture the big themes, the big moments of the high holidays. We're going to be doing this over 4 courses. And this morning we're going to start by looking at Psalm 27 and also the 13 midot, the 13 attributes of God, and how those themes sort of connect to one another, what we can see, what we can bring out of both of those pieces of liturgy. And we're also going to be doing a little bit of melody. And so I wanted to start just by teaching the melody that comes in the middle of Psalm 27. And I wanted to actually start by asking, and I'll turn the screen. I'm going to sort of go in between share screen and not, because I think it's nice to be able to see one another when we're not staring at a text. But I wanted to just start by asking what, if anything, that melody invokes for people. I think that's a question that I spend a lot of time thinking about, right? Like how do we match? So for that particular piece, that's what maybe you would call the traditional melody, right? That's the one that people most often use, but there's tons of new melodies. People have written tons of new melodies. If you Google it after the class, you'll find endless variations. But so I'm curious if that sort of, that melody invokes anything in anybody, and if anybody wants to start by sharing that. Don't be shy. Kathleen, you're not shy.
I'm not shy. I think that the melody is in 2 parts, right? The first line is da 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 da, and that, like, for me, that's very contemplative, and it also has kind of a circular quality to it. So it kind of goes round and round, and then you repeat it. Yeah, and I find that kind of like thoughtful. And then the second part is like almost an answer to that. That's I think it has a lot more longing to it, like just, and I think it reflects the words just a lot. That's all.
Yeah, anybody else? Marcia.
Well, because I know that melody, that which makes a difference, I find it very comforting.
Yeah.
It's sort of, oh, I know that melody, and you repeat it. And it's just very comforting.
Yeah, I think
at home, and I belong here, and I know what to do, and it just feels good.
Yeah, that's important. I think that's important. The fact that you know the melody, right? That often has a lot to do with how you connect to a prayer. And so I think part of what we're going to do here is learn some of the melodies, review some of the melodies, because when you get to a piece, and I think especially this year when we're not singing all together in the same room, that once you get to a piece, it's really easy to disconnect if you don't know, if you don't recognize what's being sung. And so I always try to bring a mix of new and old, because I think it's important for people to be able to connect to melodies. I also think it's sometimes nice to learn new ones. But I know that sort of connecting to those old melodies, those traditional melodies in our tradition is really important. So I want to start by, I have to go back to my share screen. Hold on for a second. since this is Monday in the Machzor, I wanted to make sure that we all know what that actually means. Machzor actually means to return or to go back or to cycle through. So the root of the word chazar means to go back. In modern Hebrew, you would return to your house. That's the way that they would use that word. And you might think, right, we know that word return because we talk about that in tshuva, and tshuva is a little bit different. Tshuva is to sort of go back and take account of things, less so the physical turning back, like in the Machzor. And just to give a little bit of context, when we were studying Mishnah, those of you who have been studying Mishnah with me, we talked a lot about the fact that for a long, long time, these prayers were said by rote, right? They were not written down. And so the prayer leader was particularly important for the service to actually happen because sorry, I'm looking at the waiting room here, because they didn't have what to look at. And then the Siddur was created. Actually, it was called a Machzor. And then much later was it actually broken up into what you now know of as the Machzor and the Siddur. So actually the Machzor came first and was this huge compilation of all the prayers, Shabbat, festivals, weekday, and then much later it was separated into what we know as the Machzor now for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So I just wanted to give that context. And in staying with the theme of the Mishnah, as a reminder, Hillel and Shammai argued about whether or not humankind should have actually been created. This is an ongoing argument in our Mishnah. Hillel says, of course, humankind should have been created. And Shammai says, we would have maybe been better off if humankind had not been created. And I brought it just a midrash to open up our studies this morning, to open up what we're going to sort of be thinking about over the next few weeks. And so I'm going to read this together. Breshit Rabbah, this is a midrash, a story. Rabbi Shimon said, when the Holy One was about to create the first human, the ministering angels formed themselves into factions and groups. Some of them said, let him be created. Some of them said, let him not be created. This is why it is written, loving kindness and truth meet, justice and peace kiss. So the pieces in italics are pieces of text to help support the argument. Loving kindness said, let him be created because he will perform acts of loving kindness. Truth said, let him not be created because he will call falsehood. And justice said, let him be created because he will do deeds of justice. Peace said, let him not be created because he will be all conflict. And what did the Holy One do? He took truth and cast him to the ground, as it is written, said, you cast truth to the ground. The ministering angel said to the Holy One, Master of the universe, why do you humiliate your seal? Lift truth up from the earth. Hence it is written, truth springs from the earth. Rabbi Huna, the elder of Tzipori, said, while the ministering angels were debating each other and conferring with each, the Holy One created the human and said, what are you debating? The human is already made. And I think this is a really nice story to open up Elul and to open up our studies of the Machzor and to look into the themes, because ultimately what the whole high holiday season is about is to remember that humans are flawed, right? To remember that humans are put on the earth for a reason. You can see loving kindness, truth, justice. They all had this argument as to whether or not humans actually deserve to be on the earth and what their purpose would be. And in the end of the day, God said, forget about what you have to say. We're going to have all of these things. We're going to have conflict. We're going to have falsehoods. We're going to have truth and justice and loving kindness. We're going to have all of these pieces of humanity. And that's why it's important that humanity exists. And so this one time a year, during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, is a time for us to do this tshuva and to acknowledge that perhaps the world is not perfect, that we're not perfect, and that we go back and sort of and review all of that and take note of that and try to figure out how to go forward into the next year with, in a new way. Catherine.
Oh, I just love this so much. I'm always amazed how humorous the Talmud is, Because, here are the angels fighting about, basically what they're accusing the humankind of.
Right.
It's just like, so great. And then God's like, too late.
Right. And you can can't you hear that argument? I know that it's made up, right, in some way, but like you can hear that argument happening amongst us right now, right? Can you hear that or?
I can hear it.
Yeah. It's very realistic, I think.
Yeah.
I thought it was like a really nice framing for what this whole season is about, really. Anybody else? Anybody else have any questions or comments before we move? Okay. Quiet group this morning. Get you some coffee. That's okay. All right. So this is Psalm 27. Now, forgive the colors. Well, don't forgive the colors, but the colors mean something. We are going to just read through and go through some of the themes that we see in this psalm. So of David, the Lord is my light and my help. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Whom should I dread? So we have the word in the first line and the word echad, the word fear and the word dread. We'll come back to that. When evil men assail me to devour my flesh, it is they, my foes, and my enemies who stumble and fall. Should an army besiege me, my heart would have no fear. Should war beset me, still I would be confident. One thing I ask of Adonai, only that do I seek, to live in the house of Adonai all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of Adonai, to frequent God's temple. So that's the line that we sang at the beginning, which is why I have it bolded. He will shelter me in his pavilion on an evil day, grant me the protection of his tent, raise me high upon a rock. Now is my head high over my enemies round about. I sacrifice in his tent with shouts of joy, singing and chanting a hymn to Adonai. Hear Adonai when I cry aloud, have mercy on me, answer me. On your behalf, my heart says, seek my face, O Lord. I seek your face. Do not hide your face from me. Do not thrust aside your servant in anger. You have ever been my help. Do not forsake me. Do not abandon me, O God, my deliverer. Though my father and mother abandon me, the Lord will take me in. Show me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my watchful foes. Do not subject me to the will of my foes, for false witnesses and unjust accusers have appeared against me. Had I not the assurance that I would enjoy the goodness of Adonai in the land of the living, look to Adonai, be strong and of good courage. O look to Adonai. Any thoughts before we sort of go line by line? Any thoughts just sort of broadly on what we just read? So to give a little bit of context, it's not actually until pretty recently, in about the 1700s, that the psalm was sort of instituted for the high holidays. We have 150 psalms. This is Psalm 27. And there's three opinions as to how you should actually say the psalm over the season. The first is that you should start at Rosh Chodesh Elul and go all the way through Simchat Torah. And each of these ideas comes with, if you do this, this will happen, right? So this particular commentator, school of thought, said you should start at Rosh Chodesh Elul, you should go all the way through Simchat Torah, which is sort of technically the end of the high holiday season. And all the negative spiritual decrees in your life will be nullified, whatever that means to you, right? This idea that if you say this psalm as a ritual through this period, you will be, I don't know, spiritually fulfilled, lifted. And then there was another school of thought that said that you should say this song every morning and evening. And similarly, your days will be filled with good. So never mind the high holidays. Psalm 27 was supposed to be said in the morning and evening all year round. And then the opinion that we go with, Rabbi Nachman, who said this in about 1800, he said that you should start at the Rosh Chodesh Elul, which is what we do, and go through the 10 days, right, ending at the end of Yom Kippur. And that this psalm is supposed to invoke some sort of longing or wanting repentance, essentially, right? The idea is that you will, if you read this psalm ritually, if you read it in the morning and in the evening, all through this period of time, you will feel closer to God, and you will feel inclined to do the repentance and do the tshuva that actually the season is all about. And I'm curious, like just from one read, yeah, Gary, go ahead.
I have a question when you said it with what was fairly recently first used, and I noticed the first couplet.
Kind of hard to hear.
The first couplet is Yirah and Afechad, and I was wondering if it was called the Days of Awe before they used this, because Yirah, which they translate as fear, I mean, is also awe,
Yes.
And did that come out of this, or was that used that way before that?
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, definitely the days of awe is not necessary. It is like a play on words, right? It's kind of this awesomeness and also fear. The interesting piece, so I don't actually know when they started to call it the days of awe, though I can tell you the Machzor from the Reform movement, which has to be written in like the late 1800s, is called Wings of Awe, I think. So I imagine that there's a play on that. But the interesting thing about those two words, and we should come back to the question about the Psalm, about ira and efchad, the commentators say that ira, this idea of fear, is fear that is known. So you sort of, you fear the things that you're familiar with. You fear the things that you already know are gonna happen. And that efchad, pachad, is the fear of the unknown. And so this idea of, fearing and then dreading, that there's actually, sometimes those words, ira and pachad, can be used interchangeably in terms of just feeling fear or feeling, anxiety or worry, but that actually it's talking about a specific way of fear, a specific type of fear. Catherine, did you have a question?
No, I was going to comment on what you said about the song, or your question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I really do see it as really echoing the process of tshuva, because like at the very beginning, it's so confident, like there's nothing, God is on my side, but like it sort of pivots in the middle. And when you get to, though I be abandoned by my mother and my father, you really feel that that's kind of stripping away. That really happens when you're not so sure, when, things are really in question. And, that I just sort of feel like when you get to that place of vulnerability, that's really, where tshuva happens. And I just feel that movement as you go through this psalm.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah, so, go ahead, Susan.
Oh, sorry, I think that's, I read that in the book by Rabbi Lou too, just the brokenness, and when you're at that state, that's when you can really reach, God can reach you at that brokenness.
Yeah. Catherine, I liked what you said too about sort of looking at, so that's why I put colors actually, is to look at sort of the themes that happen in these, I think you called it couplets, but it's a little bit maybe more than that. There's like 3 to 4 verses that get I think grouped together and sort of thematically work together. So at the very beginning, you have this confidence in God, right? The stronghold of my life. I have no worries because even when I feel fear, I know that God will be with me. I am strong, it says. My heart would have no fear. Should war come upon me, I will be confident. I'm going to be confident that God is going to be with me. And then we move into this red area, which is kind of, for me, it's kind of the central piece of this prayer. Maybe because we sing it, I don't know, maybe because it's where the first shift happens in terms of the theme, right? Where we actually get some sort of a petition. And we are asking God for something. We're asking God to sit and to dwell in the sanctuary. Rabbi Ames' Take Home Torah, I don't know if anybody listened to it, he sort of talked about how we're all longing for that. This is like the one thing, the one petition in Psalm 27 that we ask for, that we'd be able to dwell in the sanctuary. And of course, this year we're not able to do that. And so how do we recreate that sense of sitting with God? Sitting in the sanctuary. So, there's some commentators talk about the sitting is not necessarily sitting in a physical place, but sort of dwelling in the studies of Torah, or being sort of like committed to mitzvot, learning and investigating the different commandments. But I think it's a really interesting line just in the middle there about what it means to sort of dwell in the sanctuary, and particularly at this time. And then we move down a little bit farther into the next color, for me is purple, which is this fear. So now we've gone from confidence in God to petitioning God to saying, actually, please stay with me, right? There's this idea here, God, when I cry out loud, have mercy on me, do not hide your face from me. Do not leave me. Do not thrust aside your servant in anger. You have to, you have to be here. You have to help me. And then at the very, very end, we get this sort of mix of maybe anxiety, like sort of continuation of fear, and then the final lines, sort of hopeful, right? Be strong and look to God. And sorry, there's one more down there, I think. Yeah, exactly, here it is. Look to God, be strong, and be courageous, and we're gonna be okay. And I sort of think it takes us through this journey of what life is actually like, right? There are moments when we can feel really, really strong and really confident. And then there are moments when we feel less of that and that we actually need to cling on to something, whether that's God or something else, and sort of ask for help. But then the good news is that at least in this Psalm, we kind of come back in a confident way. Betsy, I see you have a hand raised. Is that because you want to say something?
Yeah, because I don't know, when I read this, I quite like this time of year when I focus on this. So I wonder, when Israel has to deal with military things and people are getting prepared for war or whatever, whether if Tehillim are ever shared with people, and I realize, many soldiers are secular, but in terms of just sometimes, like, that's the time when you might think, okay, it's okay to think about this, and whether this has anything to do with that, because to me it goes through all these emotional states that one would feel, but ultimately I feel like it comes to a confident place and you don't feel like you're alone.
Right. No, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I don't know that the military uses this psalm particularly, but for sure, Tehillim and Psalms are said in moments of distress. So you'll see, people, if somebody's very, very sick, oftentimes communities ask to say Tehillim, to say Psalms for this sick person. And I'm sure that different people have different Psalms that they say. That was part of Rabbi Ain's Take Home Torah message, which was, choose your Psalm and figure out what it is that is your message, that is your Psalm that you want to say every day, but say at least one Psalm every day. Our tradition has sort of chosen this one for us, right? Our tradition has said Psalm 27 sort of encapsulates like all of the themes that we really need to deal with over the high holidays. This idea of fear and of asking for things and of sort of this fear of abandonment and then coming back and losing faith and gaining faith. So the tradition has chosen Psalm 27 for us, but you're right. There's 150 Psalms and all of them have a message that could be important for this time of year and other times of year. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Marcia.
Yeah, I think that to me, one of the big things is the ability or the challenge or maybe the work to do or whatever is to be able to take the words, the sense of the psalm and make it work for oneself. For instance, if one had a medical condition, being able to take one over to embrace the psalm and look to Adonai, if one can divert some of the stress of dealing with the illness, it actually will make one stronger and be able to fight the illness more. We know that. If on the other hand, if the stress comes from an external source, a human being external source that is coming after one, against whom one doesn't seem to have much control, then that's the bridge. So how to work through, sort of how can I take comfort, somehow be able to separate the two, or be able to take this comfort so that I can emotionally withstand this onslaught for which I really have no control.
Yeah.
I think that's the challenge for me.
Yeah, and I think about it like every day of Elul, we're supposed to blow the shofar, right? It's a bit complicated these days because of Zoom and being not together. But every day of Elul, we're supposed to blow the shofar. That's like a ritual that we can sort of hold on to, that we know. We associate the shofar with Elul with the high holidays, and we blow the shofar. And I think the shofar sort of invokes this waking up or calling out or get ready, the high holidays are coming kind of a thing, right? And then we have this ritual of Psalm 27, also every day of Elul leading up into the high holidays. But there isn't just one emotion in this. Like this is like I think an emotional exercise that you're, like you said, Marcia, you're not just doing one, you're not sort of evoking one emotion every day. You're invoking 6 different ones in one psalm. And how does that exercise prepare us for what's to come, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Like going through every single day, getting ourselves sort of in the depth, and then coming out in a sort of hopeful way. What is that really about? Catherine, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I'm really noticing is, or it's kind of what I said before, but maybe a different way to look at it is the beginning, it's very external, the confidence. But then when you get to the middle, where it says, Adonai, hear my voice when I call, be gracious to me and answer, it's you who I speak, says my heart. It's sort of like you're going, this is what is on the outside, but here, look, this is what's really on the inside, which is another way. That's what I definitely see a lot. It's like whatever you're projecting, a lot of times is confidence, but what you really feel on the inside is like, I'm totally freaked out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really calling a whole lot of a whole depth of emotions, like you said, sort of the internal and the external. Betsy, do you have your hand again, I think?
I do not. I didn't realize it was still
Okay,
up.
no problem. Okay, anybody else? Any comments on Psalm 27?
This is Todd. I was just thinking about the contrast between Psalm 27 and Ashrei. And Ashrei we say every day, but it's the majesty of God, the splendor of God. In fact, themes that seem much more in keeping with much of the rest of the liturgy on the high holidays. Whereas Psalm 27 is so much more personal and intimate, and it seems like that seems a lot closer to some of the daily prayers we actually have in our Siddur. So I just found that very interesting to kind of flip.
Yeah, so we studied Ashrei a while back. Was it in the daily blessings class? I don't even really remember, but sometime between now and March, we studied Ashrei in our morning class, and we had this conversation about the Ashrei because it was so overflowing with praise that perhaps the question was, like, can you praise God too much? Like, does it become lost if you just say, you're amazing, you're great, you're awesome, you're da-da-da, right? Because that's kind of what the Ashrei is this like long poem pute of praise. And here, this one's like maybe a bit more realistic, right? Like what Catherine was saying, sort of really tapping into, okay, like, yeah, I might on the outside feel really grateful or I might act really grateful and confident and hopeful. And then on the inside, I'm really a lot of anxiety and fear. And so I think that this, and so you're right in that it in some ways sort of doesn't fit with the high holidays, but in terms of the liturgy, but I think it fits perfectly with what we're supposed to be dealing with during this time, right? Yeah, great, thank you. All right, so any other comments? Yeah, Gary.
I think there's a really nice mention in the Machzor about the use for shelter, which goes and progresses from house to sukkah to tent, from permanence to total lack of permanence, which is kind of fascinating the way it progresses.
Yeah, so it starts out with, it's interesting, it doesn't do that in the translation here, right? Is that, we don't see that. But you're saying it goes from sukkah, which is impermanent, to tent, and then what's the last one?
Well, it says it starts with house.
Oh,
yeah, buy it first.
Yeah.
But one of them is very permanent, and the tent is transitory.
Yeah, that's great. So what is that? I mean, what's the context of that? Like, does that help you to?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I think we're asked to come into this thinking that we're firmly planted, and we move over the course of this to the sukkah kind of protects us from the elements, and it is a permanent space for a while. But it's a basic protection to the tent where we're just we're wandering and we're asked to reassess and to see which direction we may go.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Yeah, and the sukkah sort of in this season is also a symbol, right? Because we're heading towards Sukkot and the idea again of impermanence, and maybe pieces of our lives feel a bit unstable, kind of like the sukkah, but then we're sort of grounded in whatever it means to dwell in God's house, I guess, right? The house of God. Great, thank you. Yeah, Todd.
Just one more observation is that this is not shir, this is not mizmor, right? It's just the David.
Yeah.
Very simple, very stripped down. It's like we're left to the essential elements.
Yeah, absolutely right. It's not meant to be a song. And interestingly, I said at the very beginning, we have this achat she'alti, which we all sort of find familiar and comforting. And there's been a lot of new melodies that have been written for it. And I can't really hold on to, and I can't really, I don't want to sort of, bash musicians. It's not that. People should feel free to write whatever music they want, but I haven't been able to cling on to any of those melodies because I don't feel like it really fits the words here. And I think part of it is because actually this isn't written as a song. It's not poetic in that way where you see, words repeating, like you see a lot of Psalms have sort of repetitive structure and it doesn't work really that way. And so it's hard musically, I think, to put real music to this Psalm. All right, we're gonna move somewhat, not quickly, but we're gonna move on to the second piece of liturgy that I wanted to look at today. And I'll just sing it once. We sing in this class L'Shem Chinuch for the sake of education. So I know that there's like a lot of Adonais here and a lot of repetitive words. And so for those of you who maybe aren't used to just singing this type of liturgy, in the shower kind of thing, like, don't worry, this is all for education. And we're just doing it to learn the words. So this is called the 13 attributes, the 13 midot, the 13 attributes of God. So I gave it to us in black here at the top, which is how you might see it in the Machzor. But I also separated it into colors so that you could actually count the 13 that we have. Adonai, Adonai, Erachum v'chanun, Erech Hapayim, V'rav Chesed ve'emet, Notzer Chesed la'alafim, Nosei avon v'fesha, V'chata v'nakeh. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'chanun, Erech Apayim, V'rav Chesed ve'emet, Noser Chesed la'alafim, Nosei avon v'fesha, V'chata v'nakeh. So these lines are repeated many, many, many times throughout our high holiday season. We start at Slichot with these words. We see them on Rosh Hashanah in the Torah service, though actually when it's Shabbat, we don't recite these words. So we'll talk about what that's about. And then we see them all through the confessions in Yom Kippur. And I want to just give a little bit of context. These words are from the Torah. Todd, this is your Torah reading, right? Yeah. These words are from the Torah, and I wanted to give a little bit of context from where they come from. So God said to Moses, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe P'sol lecha, carve 2 tablets of stone. So this is after Moses has gone up and gotten the first tablets, came down, saw the golden calf. full of anger, smashed the tablets on the ground. So now we're at number 2. We're at the second set of tablets. Carve 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will inscribe upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you shattered. Be ready by morning, and in the morning come up to Mount Sinai and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. No one else shall come up with you, and no one else shall be seen anywhere on the mountain. Neither shall the flocks and the herds graze at the foot of the mountain. So Moses carved 2 tablets of stone like the first, and early in the morning he went up on Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, taking the 2 stone tablets with him. Vayered Adonai be'anan v'yityatzev imo sham. The Lord came down in a cloud. This is the liturgy that you're going to recognize from the holidays. Vayikra b'shem Adonai, and he proclaimed the name of God. Vaya'avur Adonai al panav vayikra. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum v'chanun, Erech apayim v'rav chesed v'emet, Notzer chesed la'alafim, nosei avon v'fesha v'chata v'nakeh. God, oh God, a compassionate God, gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. So that's where it ends. That's where we know that it ends in the liturgy. But interestingly, the context tells us that it goes on, yet God does not remit all punishment. Interesting if we add that to the end every time, right? But visits the iniquity of parents upon children and children's children, upon the 3rd and 4th generations. Moses hastened to bow low to the ground in homage and said, if I have gained your favor, O Lord, pray let the Lord go in your midst, even though this is a stiff-necked people. V'salachta la'avonenu u'chatatenu unchautanu. Pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your own. Vayomer hine anochi karet brit. And he said, I hereby make a covenant before all your people. I will work such wonders as have not been wrought on all the earth or in any nation, and all the people who are with you shall see how awesome are the Lord's deeds, which I will perform for you. So if anybody's in the Machzor, Lev Shalem, I'm actually on page 336, but I recreated that page so that people could see this, because I think this is kind of an interesting, get this down here like this. So what they've done here in the Machzor is they give the Hebrew, followed by what I gave as sort of a translation, followed by an explanation. But I want to actually just start by asking the question. So we talked about Psalm 27 as sort of flowing through these emotions. Todd brought up the Ashrei and said, well, the Ashrei is like all praise. And Psalm 27 is kind of a mix of praise and fear and anxiety and hope. And then we have this liturgy, which we say over and over and over, and we use it as a way of confessing our sins. And I'm curious, like, what comes up for people in this? I don't want to influence your answer, but to me, it feels like a declaration in some way of faith. But if you look at the context of where it comes from, it's actually God who's saying, I am these things, right? So if you take it out of context, right? If you just read God, compassionate, slow to anger, merciful, patient, abounding in love, it's almost like a declaration of faith, right? It's almost like us, the people, telling ourselves, I guess, that this is what God is, and then because God is this way, we should act in a certain way. But the context tells us otherwise, right? The context actually says God felt like God needed to remind us that God is this way. So any thoughts or comments just based on the context, what this series of declarations of words might be coming to sort of help us or teach us?
Or maybe something to strive for.
Yeah, great. So like an ideal.
Yes.
An ideal for ourselves or for God, do you think, Sandra?
Both.
Both. Yeah, so we're supposed to live B'Tselem Elohim, right? We're supposed to live in the image of God, kind of like God. And so if God should be all of these things, we should also be all of these things. Great, Dara.
Well, in the context of, having to have Moses carve the second set of tablets after they built the golden calf, like what you said was that God has to remind us that God is these things. And especially the one that sticks out to me is slow to anger. After the people have done this and built the golden calf, that God is giving us a second chance. And so I think that's how the context informs these attributes.
Yeah, so God is basically saying, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you want to build a golden calf because you're feeling a bit impatient, you should remember, you should declare these words. You should remember who brought you here and what your responsibility is. Interesting that you picked up on slow to anger, because a lot of the commentators also pick up on this one and say, is that really true? Is God really slow to anger? God gets pretty angry pretty quickly, actually, right? And we see that happen here. And so what the commentators explain is that what it actually means is slow to punish, which I think is true, right? So we don't see a lot of God sort of striking down punishment right away. We see a lot of maybe anger in God. But God says, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and he doesn't necessarily do those things. So it's interesting that you pick up on that. Catherine, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's basically what people are saying. I mean, if this is the second, giving of the second Torah, I mean, we really need that. It's almost like, an emotional envelope to put the Torah inside of. That's what the context is, I guess, it's just, because otherwise, is it just, laws, like law, or where is the love, I guess? And yeah, definitely just like reminding, almost God rewriting the Torah in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ellen, make sure you're on mute.
I never have realized the context that this prayer came in before, and it just puts the whole high holidays in this wonderful perspective for me, because here is this example of this people who strayed so far away that it always astounds me that Moses was willing to shatter the tablets that were written by God. So it's hard to know who sinned more in this case, and in some respect to me. And yet he is able to get the people kind of together again and go up. And here is God who is saying this, and it obviously encapsulates the high holidays, that we may have this compact with God, but we get carried away and we stray in different ways. And yet when we go back, before we're even given the laws, we are told again, this is who God is. You can mess up. It's okay. I'm going to be here before you do it and after you do it. And so in a way, it seems to me that not only in the high holy days are we trying to examine our own lives and figure out, are there places where we strayed from the path? What can we do even better? But even more than that, it's our opportunity to totally reconnect with God.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's a really beautiful midrash about the first breaking of the tablets, and it ends by saying, Yasher koach sheshibarta. Like God basically says, good work, Moses. Good job breaking those tablets. And there's this idea that actually those first tablets had to be broken in order to really move on and to learn from that mistake, and to be able to, to write the second ones and to really create the tradition that we've created from that. And so you're right. I think that that there's this idea that God is not going anywhere and that, you know, mistakes happen. And that's what this whole season is about. Irene. Oh, and then Ernie.
It's a little bit what you said, in the sense that, yes, God is not slow to anger, but is definitely slow to punishment, and we get a second chance. And if there hadn't been the second tablet, I think God would have given us a third tablet, which he keeps giving us, I guess.
But Moses is not slow to anger. Breaking the tablets doesn't indicate slowness to anger.
Yeah, Moses is not maybe acting in the way that God is acting. Or, well, we're distinguishing between anger and punishment, right? Slow to anger versus slow to punish.
But also, through breaking the tablet, it's a little bit what you talked about also, and Rabbi Lou is like expressing his own anger and dismay, and by breaking the tablet, it expresses so much more how disappointed he is, and it's through the brokenness that the light came in and a second tablet came in.
Thank you, Ernie.
Yeah, I'm curious. The Adonai is Yud Hey Vav Hey. Why you have an abbreviation of Hey Yud? It seems is it a convention?
Yeah, it's just, well, so in the Machzor, you're right, it's Yud Hey Vav Hey. And when a lot of times when it's written on like text and paper, it's actually not a Yud, it's a Hey with a little apostrophe there. And it's just like a shorthand that you write sometimes. I don't know, honestly, I copy and pasted it out of the Safari.
For Hashem.
Yeah, yes, for Hashem. But what I mean is that, right, in order to not sort of say the word of God when you're not in a prayer context is the idea. That's why I started by saying, we're saying this l'shem chinuch, we're saying this for the sake of education. We're not actually saying this prayer, you know, in its moment and in its time. And so Hey is kind of, it means Hashem. It's like the way of not saying it in full. Yeah, Irene.
What do you write on top of a letter when you start a letter? Do you write Hey Yud?
For what do you mean?
I don't know, but I seem to recall that people, when they write a letter, they often have like something on top that refers to.
Do you mean like Bet Hey? Is that, yeah, so like in the name of God. Well, let's talk about it later. Okay. Okay, Betsy, do you have a question or a comment? Okay. I just want to go, yeah, Todd, go ahead.
I was just saying, like, I generally had thought about this prayer as we're trying to remind God of these qualities so he can grant us, reprieve, right, from the judgment. But I think more and more, actually, we say this to remind ourselves of the context of which it happens and that God will grant it. It's almost like to reassure ourselves in this moment of great doubt.
Yeah.
And that occurs so much during Yom Kippur.
That's exactly right. I think that prayer often, it feels like, out of context, it feels like the Ashrei, right? It feels like we're saying, God, you are, God, you are, God, you are, but and in sort of in service of God. But actually, I think this really is about reminding ourselves of when we miss the mark, God is all of these things. I think that's exactly right. So I just want to go through each of the midot, each of the characteristics. And like I said, I'm on page 336 in the Lev Sholom. But basically the way that this structure works is it says Adonai, and then there's like a commentary, like why, for example, does it say Adonai twice? Well, this commentary is explaining that the first time is God before you sin, and the second time is God after you sin. Right? So I am God, Adonai, this is me before you sin, and this is me after you sin. El, again, another word for God, merciful to all, it says. Both Jews and non-Jews, kind of an interesting commentary there. Rachum, merciful. Merciful to who? Merciful to those who merit that mercy. Merciful to those who might need it. V'chanun, compassionate. Compassionate to who? To those without merit. Again, compassionate to people who might need it. Erech apayim, patient. Patient with who? With the wicked. Patient with those who may need this repentance. Berav chesed, abounding in loving kindness. Again, with those in need of loving kindness. The emet, and faithfulness, rewarding those who do my will. Notzer chesed la'alafim, assuring love for the thousands of generations when you do good deeds. Nose avon, forgiving iniquity when you sin deliberately. And vafesha, transgression, when you rebel maliciously. V'chata'a, and sin, when you sin unintentionally. And v'nakeh, granting pardon, when you repent. So there's all these 13 attributes of God. And then there's the subtext of what those actually mean for God and in the world. So not just faithful, to no end, right? But faithful to those people who follow God's will. I'm curious if those commentaries, if thinking about it that way changes it for anybody. Yeah, Iren.
I'm wondering who is like that but God? I mean, who is so perfect? Those commentaries encompass everyone who in the world, the Jews, the non-Jews, the one who do good, do bad, willingly, and it's almost like it's an ideal image of God.
It's an interesting question that you asked, because I would have anticipated the opposite question, which is that God? Like, is that the God we experience? And not to challenge, but that's a lot of high holiday liturgy, and we're going to get into that in the next couple of weeks, right? This idea of, if you do these things, God will be this way. And I don't know that that's how all of us necessarily experience life, right? That if you do charity, and if you do tshuva, and if you do, that God will sort of protect you always and no bad will ever happen, right? That's a theology, Gary.
But is God even like that?
What's not? This prayer.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, in the context, right, taken out of context, you might not see it that way. That's true. Yeah, Gary.
I may be a little slow on the uptake here, but I'm going back to, you started this by reading the Torah portion where it comes from. And you chose to use this one. This interpretation appears very late in the Yom Kippur service, when we're hoping for forgiveness, but we don't know about second chances. And by evoking it here, and in connection with the Torah portion, which you just read, we're reminded that we do get second chances. We got the second tablets just before we're presented with this. So it's a reminder of that we have been given second chances and that we do get them.
Right. And so, and we say these 13 midot, we say them all over the confessions. And you're right, until the very, very end, do we actually get this explanation or this sort of breakdown of the way that I have it here on the screen. We don't actually get the explanation of what the 13 midot are. We just are saying them, in terms of from a place of confession. And without the context, you wouldn't know, right? You might not know that we get second chances, but it's a great reminder. Betsy, I see you have your hand. Is that still up or maybe up again?
It is still up. I'm sorry. It is not up
I put
again.
it down for you before, so I just wanted that. Don't worry. Contribute all you want. Anybody else have anything to say?
Well, I'm going to relate this to the fast days, because we do say this every fast day when we read the Torah. And those are days, all those fast days are days people have screwed up. And we're kind of communal atonement for those days. But Yom Kippur actually predates all of those fast days and comes, it's a God-given day in the Torah. It's almost like we have this annual cleansing. And so it really extracts that, and this phrase in that moment, and try, and there are different ways it resonates. And that's why we just say over and over and over again. And this particular interpretation is like, oh, God is out there. There's a facet of God for everybody. Everybody can connect with one or more of those pieces in there.
Yeah, I love that. Great, thank you. Yeah, and the different days of the year and the different times in which we say it definitely can invoke different meaning in different contexts. Catherine.
Yeah, the part that moves me, I think, the most is just the first Adonai, Adonai. I am who I am before you sin, and I am who I am after you sin. Because I sort of feel like that's saying God is this constant, and who or whatever God is, he's there, she is there. I don't know whether all these other attributes even encompass all that God is. I mean, it's some of the things that God is, because I really, for me in my theology, God is pretty unknowable and inexplicable in many ways, but I'm willing to say that he encompasses all the things that come after. But I think just knowing that what I do doesn't really affect who God is kind of comforting.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you're important, but you're not changing the way that God is in the world.
Yeah.
All right, Iren, I think last comment, and then we'll close up. Yeah, you have to unmute.
It also seems to me that it is what we hope God is going to be. A little bit different from what you say, Catherine, is that it may be God saying, this is what I am, and let me remind you, but it's coming from the inside of the human being. This is what we hope God would be. If he's going to, at the end, give us all that, I would hope, but it's almost a human interpretation of what we want God to be there for us in moment of messing up.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's end with this line of Psalm 27, and then I'll give a few announcements. Achat shalti meit Adonai otavakesh. Achat shalti meit Adonai otavakesh. Shivti beveit Adonai kol yemei chayai lachazot benoam Adonai ulevaker behechalo lachazot benoam Adonai ulevaker behechalo. Thanks everyone for being here this morning and for learning together, for adding your contributions. You can blow at the end if you want, Catherine. I wanted to just let everyone know, I'm sure you know already, Elul is starting this week, lots going on at the synagogue. I also just wanted to say that I have a very light plan in terms of where we're going for the next 4 or 5 weeks, but if there are pieces in the liturgy that you're particularly interested in or want to get to, feel free to send me an email or even send us chat on the side. If there are pieces that you're wondering about or that you want me to include, I can hopefully try to find ways to do that. Like I said, I have my own sort of plan, but there's always room for more and for tweaking, especially to figure out what's interesting to everybody here.